Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior, and today we're going to be talking about how certain characters within Injustice 2 have in fact somewhat returned from the dead. When I say this, I mean that there's certain characters on the roster who were initially killed off, but were in fact brought back from the dead. So here I'll be going in depth and kind of giving you guys a better understanding of how these characters made it into the second game, as well as clear up some continuity problems that the Injustice comics have with the Injustice 2 game. You could also consider this as a part 2 section for my Injustice 2 Who's Dead video, in which I pretty much talk about every single character death within the Injustice franchise. Feel free to check that out if you haven't had a look at it already. Now right off the bat, let's talk about the comics. The comics are very canon. There are probably very tiny retcons here and there, but outside of that, what you pick up from the store and what you read is pretty much canon. And just to clear up something, as it does conflict with the comics, the first chapter within Injustice 2 is a flashback, and is really kind of there to set the scene for the game, and the conflict that kind of opens up between these superheroes and where the kind of killing and no killing rule stands. Because for some of you who don't know, in the Injustice 2 game, Victor Zsasz is killed within the first chapter, whereas in the Injustice comic books, Victor Zsasz isn't initially killed till year 5 of the comic books. Now let's say if this flashback had been accurate, then Alfred Pennyworth would still be alive. You see, Alfred didn't die till year 5 of the comic books, where he was in fact killed by Zsasz, and Alfred's death within the comic books was the motivation for Bruce to kind of push his limits in year 5 of the comics. And to further solidify that the comics have some canon in the game, the attack on Arkham which we see in fact results in Dick Grayson's death, and we do not see it here. So again, it just kind of goes to show the inaccuracy of the flashback, but it obviously sacrifices that for tone and where the game kind of stands from that point onward. Anyway, I do apologize for kind of going on a tangent there, but I really wanted to kind of establish the validity that the comics have within the game. Of course, hey, this is comic books, and we can bring anyone back from the dead, but of course people want to understand a little more, and hopefully this clears some things up. Now let's start off with Swamp Thing. Now this is a very strange and rather peculiar one. You see, in year 3 of the comics, Swamp Thing had gotten involved in the battle between the regime and the insurgency, and the war had gotten so out of hand that magical beings were starting to get involved, such as Mr. Mixelplick, I think I said his name right, and Trigon. These two beings battled each other on Earth and literally began tearing reality apart due to their overwhelming power, and unfortunately Swamp Thing was a casualty in this battle. Although he wasn't killed, it seems like he had been trapped in Trigon's realm, which essentially is hell. Now despite this, within the Injustice 2 game, Swamp Thing does appear and does confirm how he still exists. You see, due to the nature of his powers, he can never really die unless it's something really kind of crazy. But Swamp Thing is a being of magic and is so in touch with Mother Nature that he can't really die. He'll just kind of rebuild himself. He's a guardian to the green, and as long as that green does exist, he will continue to guard it until the end of time. So I guess in that sense he's kind of immortal, but I'm sure there's a way you can kill off Swamp Thing. I'm pretty sure they did it in Justice League Dark. Now here's a very simple one. The Joker. This character is 100% dead, but you know, comics, they can bring back people, but still from what we've known and how the writers have in fact written the story, the Joker is dead, and the only time he ever appears within the story is as a hallucination from Scarecrow's fear toxin. So Joker doesn't really kind of make it into Injustice 2 alive, but more as a playable character, since the character does have an extremely massive fan base behind him. And whilst we're on the topic of fear gas, let's talk about Scarecrow. This is one that I found the most difficult to kind of understand, as he was somewhat quote-unquote killed during the first few issues of the Injustice 2 comics, as his fear toxin had been stolen by the Joker and he was left in a laboratory with the smile of death on his face, as it seemed like he had been exposed to Joker's laughing gas. Now from reading the comics and learning what kind of happened to him from that point onwards, is that Jonathan Crane hadn't actually been killed. Obviously no shit Sherlock, but what happened is that he was exposed to enough of the toxin that it had put him in a comatized state, which is why he disappears for such a long amount of time and does make his appearance in the Arkham Asylum map as a stage transition within the first game. Obviously Crane had come out of his comatized state and was once again on a massive rampage. And my last and final one will be Green Arrow, who was confirmed as dead within the first Injustice game. So how was Oliver Queen kind of in Injustice 2? Well, allow me to explain. The Oliver Queen we see within Injustice 2 is from a completely different universe. We're calling this Earth 3, so he's Earth 3 Oliver Queen. Now in this world, Earth 1 Oliver Queen had in fact been brutally beaten to death by Superman, and Earth 2 Oliver Queen, which we saw in the first game, went back to his own world. So how did Earth 3 Oliver Queen kind of get here? Well, you see, after Earth 1's Oliver Queen died, his partner Black Canary was extremely heartbroken. She was in fact going to be the mother of his child, and understandably bared a very strong grudge towards Clark Kent. So during the climax of the Injustice Year 2 comics, Black Canary went toe to toe with Clark, and she was doing extremely well and nearly killed him until he acquired a yellow ring of fear. After acquiring this, he would fire his eye lasers straight through her and morally wound her. After he had left, Dr. Fate would intervene and take her to a place outside of space and time, where she was reunited with her child from Earth 1. Here she meets Earth 3 Oliver Queen. Now you see, Earth 3 Oliver Queen in fact lost his diner. She had died in that world, so Oliver Queen was kind of missing his wife. Through the assistance of Dr. Fate, he was able to reunite Black Canary with an Oliver Queen, and ever since they were reunited, they've kind of picked up from where they left off, which leads up to Injustice 2. So eventually, when Dinah returns back to Earth 1, Oliver Queen decides to join her, so they can be a family and raise their child correctly. But this is how Green Arrow still exists within Injustice 2. Although we don't really cover DLC characters, let's briefly talk about Red Hood and Starfire. Now Jason Todd never appeared within the Injustice universe, or was even mentioned until he kind of appeared within the first Fighter Pack, so we can all lead to presume that the whole Death in a Family story arc did indeed happen, and Todd was in fact killed by the Joker. Now as for the whole Under the Red Hood story arc, I'm not 100% sure if that happened within this universe, as like I mentioned at the very beginning of this, Todd is not mentioned throughout the entirety of the Injustice universe. He's been very kind of low-key, and no one's really said anything about him. Yeah, he's very briefly mentioned during an exchange with the Joker and Damian Wayne, but outside of that, Todd's relatively unknown, and is most likely doing what's very typical of the character by just going off and doing his own thing. Todd's always been a very independent character, and has been able to kind of break away from this Batman family thing, allowing him to become more of his own character. Now as for Starfire, those of you who don't know, she didn't die within the Injustice universe, but was in fact cast into the Phantom Zone during year 1 of the comics. She'd been stranded there along with Red Robin, Superboy and a few others. She'd more or less been left there for about 5 long years. Starfire is the only person we know who have actually managed to survive the Phantom Zone, out of the group that we know she was put there with. Now these are DLC characters, so we don't really know if they actually have any validity since they are just downloadable characters, but I'm sure fan favourites like Red Hood and Starfire can wiggle their way within to the game's canon. Anyway, that's kind of it for this video guys. Hopefully this has kind of cleared up quite a bit of stuff, as I understand a lot of it here is quite obvious, but there are a lot of people who don't really kind of understand what goes on outside of the video game, and the absolute absurdity that is comic books. So hopefully this has cleared up some things for you guys, as Injustice 2's continuity has always been something that's quite crazy. Now please put down in the comments below, what other kind of Injustice 2 stuff would you like me to talk about? I'm open to talk about anything that's Injustice 2 related here. Now before this video wraps up guys, if possible let's try getting it to about 500 likes. It's a great way of supporting this channel, as YouTube's adpocalypse is still currently going on, so it'd help my channel out a ton. Now as always guys, please comment, like, subscribe and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care and I'll see you all next time.